What if you lived your life on purpose? I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that at one time or another, you've hit the snooze button on your alarm clock. Most of the time, you do it because you're tired and you simply need to eke out just a few more minutes of shut-eye. But how about those times when the dreams you're having are just so good, you don't want them interrupted by reality? What if I told you by living your life on purpose and with purpose, you could live out your dreams in real time? 25 years ago, I stood on this very stage, in this very spot, as a graduating member of the Hewitt class of 1989. And I remember listening to our valedictorian talk about goals and dreams and our future. And it dawned on me, the only goal I had was getting the top bunk that fall at college. Not big picture, if you know what I mean. Being assigned to live with a girl nicknamed Moose pretty much ensured that my dreams of the top bunk, or anything else for that matter, would never become a reality. I hadn't really given much thought to what I wanted out of life. Without realizing it, I had spent most of my life on autopilot, progressing from grade to grade, having practically all of my decisions made for me without ever taking notice. But as a kid, there was a book series I loved called Choose Your Own Adventure, where you were presented with a series of decisions you needed to make to determine the outcome of the story. Every few pages, you'd need to make a choice that would result in a setback, a twist, or perhaps, in the best-case scenario, propel you forward. You were the star of your own story, and your actions determined where you'd wind up. Choose Your Own Adventure gave me one of my first tastes of what it was like to make a decision. Ironically, in real life, the very opposite was happening. I was so used to following someone else's lead that when it was time to apply to college, when I could have chosen my own adventure, I ended up following my boyfriend to school. We broke up before my freshman bags were packed. I told myself it didn't matter and school would be great. It wasn't. What had I been thinking? The answer? I hadn't been thinking at all. I'd been going through the motions of life, following the herd, and allowing my own decisions to be guided by other people. By sophomore year, I was absolutely miserable. Something had to give. I thought long and hard about what school would be a good fit for me, and even though it had been deemed a reach just a year before, I had applied to New York University, determined to get in. In fact, I was so determined, it was the only school I applied to. I was accepted, and I was ecstatic. But 3 years later, standing on stage with my cap and gown, I found myself in the same place all over again, living only in the moment, never giving too much thought to life after college. So I moved back home and took the first job that was offered to me, afraid there might not be another. If you don't know where you're going, it's impossible to figure out when you'll arrive. And that was me, on a never-ending road trip with pit stops, but no final destination in sight. A year later, unhappy in a dead-end job, I knew it was time to make a change. I enrolled in NYU's School of Continuing Education, and after a semester, I found my calling in event production. It was like a switch which suddenly flipped, and now I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Shortly after that, I landed a dream job. Life was great. I was moving in a direction that I chose, rather than one I ended up in, and the difference was extraordinary. Several years later, my boyfriend proposed, and when that ring box suddenly appeared, it just seemed like the right thing to do was say yes. Didn't every girl want to be proposed to? And wasn't I about to turn 30? All the things that we argued and disagreed about, and all the reasons we weren't right for each other, disappeared as he slipped that ring on my finger that summer day. I walked down the aisle similar to the way you walk down that conveyor belt at the airport, rapidly, hoping for a good trip with no turbulence. No luck. The ride was bumpy from the start. Suddenly, we were on opposing ends of some of life's biggest decisions. Starting a family, buying a home. I was miserable. I lost weight. I lost friends. I lost confidence. I began counting down days like a prisoner instead of looking forward to them. One day, I looked in the mirror, and I hardly recognized the woman I had become. I remember thinking, what if I met me? What would I think of myself? Was this the world I imagined? I cringed at the answer. It was time to choose my own adventure. I gave notice, at home. I didn't poll my friends or family. I knew in my heart I needed to start all over again and create a better life for myself. What's the point of living if you never feel alive? So while I should have been celebrating my second wedding anniversary, I was signing a lease for an apartment and divvying up our wedding china. Not everything was awful, though. I was starting a new job in 2 weeks as the head of special events for a national nonprofit, giving me just enough time to settle into my new life. The morning before my move, I said goodbye to my husband for the last time. He agreed to leave the apartment to allow me to continue packing and move out. A few minutes after he left, the phone rang. I figured it was him. It wasn't. It was my new boss, asking if I could work that night and help with an event they were short-staffed for. How could I say no? It sure beat staying home and crying under the covers until the movers arrived the next day. The phone rang again. It was the local jeweler reminding me I dropped off a necklace to be inscribed with my married initials. I wouldn't be needing that anymore. I told him to forget the initials and engrave that day's date instead. I'd pick it up before I left for work. So when I stopped in later to pick it up, the jeweler, attempting in small talk, said, "What does this mean, this date? Are you celebrating something?" No, I'm not celebrating anything. Actually, today just happens to be the worst day of my life, and I always want to remember it. Nothing could have prepared that poor guy for my answer. So when I went to pay, he waved his hand away, refusing to take my money. I thanked him and left, wearing the worst day of my life on a silver chain around my neck, and headed to my first day of work. The event just happened to be the largest singles party in New York City, and my role was to help the sponsors set up and get ready to host 3,000 young professionals that evening. That night, one of the sponsors thanked me for all the help I'd given his staff. We talked for a bit, and I remember being disappointed when somebody radioed me on my walkie-talkie, forcing me to excuse myself. As we shook hands, he looked me in the eye and said, "Before you go, there's something I want to ask you." "What's with today's date on your necklace?" he said, smiling. I grabbed my necklace, horrified that he had noticed. What the hell was I thinking, wearing this on the day of the actual date? I wanted to curl up in a ball on the floor and disappear, but there he was, still smiling, waiting for an answer. I told him it was the worst day of my life. I told him I left my husband. I told him I was moving tomorrow. I'd probably be fired. And then, for some odd reason, this handsome man smiled at me. And before I could say anything, he said, "I'll tell you what. Clearly you've got a lot going on. Give me your phone number, and in 2 months, once you've gotten settled, I'm going to take you out." I couldn't believe my ears. I handed over my phone number in a state of disbelief. That night, he gave me a lift home in a cab and wished me good luck with my move. He said he'd talk to me in September. I chose to believe him. 2 months later, he called like he said he would. I was a completely different person. I had a job I loved, a home of my own. I jumped out of bed every morning instead of reaching over and hitting that snooze button, hiding from my own life. I had chosen my own adventure and was living my life on purpose. 3 days later, we had our first date. A year and a half later, he asked me to marry him. This time when I said yes, I meant it with all my heart. 5 months later, we were married. Today, we have an amazing life with a 5-year-old daughter that I teach to make her own decisions every day. Sometimes that means she chooses breakfast for dinner, and sometimes she dresses like a gypsy, and that's okay with me. I want her to learn from a young age that she can make her own decisions. In 3 days, we'll celebrate our 8th wedding anniversary, and I still wear my necklace every single day. But now the date around my neck represents the best day of my life, and that's what I tell anyone who asks. So I urge you not to waste a day of your life on autopilot, delaying your own happiness. Make your own choices and own your own decisions. Create the life you deserve and the world you imagined. Be the star of your own story and strive to be the best version of yourself. Ask yourself, what if I met me? And think about your answer. Would you like what you see? Don't just exist, thrive. Live with such an intention that the snooze button will no longer be an option. Live your life with purpose and on purpose. And don't let anyone ever choose your own adventure.